All right, so it is 12 o'clock and I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our 24th annual Virtual Elder Abuse Conference, Evolving Interventions and Resources. This conference is presented by Caring Transitions of Syracuse, and my name is Lauren Ulrich, and I'm the Abuse in Later Life Prevention and Outreach Coordinator at Vera House. All webinars during this conference are free thanks to the generous support of our sponsors. In addition to our presenting sponsor, we're fortunate to have 3 platinum sponsors this year, and those are Loretto, Onondaga County Department of Adult and Long-Term Care Services, and Syracuse Jewish Family Service. To officially begin this year's conference, I'd like to introduce 2 of these sponsors to share some welcoming remarks with us. And first, I have a pre-recorded message from Judith Wilbur, the Director of Syracuse Jewish Family Service.
Hello, my name is Judith Wilbur. I'm the Director of Syracuse Jewish Family Service, and we are honored and proud to be a platinum sponsor of this year's Elder Abuse Conference, as well as having participated in the work of the Syracuse Area Elder Justice Coalition for many years now. Our commitment to this mission, to educate about, to prevent, and to assist in recovery from elder abuse, goes back to our day-to-day work with older adults, with their families and friends, with the professional service providers and healthcare providers to them. Our work often finds itself at the intersection of dementia or cognitive decline and elder abuse or elder neglect, I think for many obvious reasons, but I'd like to say a few words about the reciprocal relationship between elder justice, dementia, and well-being, or the absence of abuse. If you think about social determinants of health and issues of equity, these apply generally in society as well as for older adults. Traditional social determinants of health, such as housing, transportation, the built environment, such as education, loneliness and social isolation. All of these things predispose middle and later life adults to cognitive decline, and that cognitive decline in turn predisposes older adults to poorer health outcomes. It's kind of a reciprocal double whammy. However, it turns out that working with issues of dementia in concrete logistical ways, improving people's housing, reducing their loneliness and social isolation, and helping them stay socially connected, improving their access to health care and the continuity of that access not only improves brain health, but it raises the equity of their health outcomes overall. I would invite you to contact us for more information or for more assistance in making an impact on social determinants of health and elder justice by way of the practical work of applying our services and our attention to improving health literacy and access to health care, to securing proper housing, nutrition, transportation, and social connection for our older adults. Thank you.
And next, I'd like to introduce Brenda McCutcheon, the Vice President of Mission and Director of Therapeutic Recreation at Loretto. Brenda, please take the floor.
Greetings, everyone. On behalf of Kim Townsend, our President and CEO, and the Loretto family of care, I'm grateful to be with all of you present at this conference. Our mission together is to build greater understanding of how we can raise awareness of the issues surrounding abuse of older adults for this generation and for future generations. Together, we can network to try to create a world for older adults free of neglect and mistreatment and exploitation. So thank you for being here, and thank you for partnering with each other to share your knowledge, your ideas, and best practices. Our hope is always to get a place to where the voices of older adults are heard. And wouldn't it be wonderful if there was no elder abuse? Years ago, I studied the work of Rabbi Zalman. He was the founder of what I referenced as saging work. It was there I learned about the definition of an elder that I'd like to share with you. It comes from the Live Oak Project in California. An elder is a person who is still growing, still a learner, still with potential, and whose life continues to have within it promise for and connection to the future. An elder is still in pursuit of happiness and joy and pleasure, and her or his birthright to these remains intact. Moreover, an elder is a person who deserves respect and honor, and whose work is to synthesize wisdom from long life experience and to formulate this into a legacy for future generations. As I close, aging is inevitable. But the piece I just read to you sees older adults through the lens of dignity and well-being. How we work to help our elders to be seen, treated with respect, and honored for the lives they have lived in the communities that they have shaped is key to growing older. This is indeed the importance of presence and compassion, which is central to the meaning of life. Bless each of you in the work that you do to protect vulnerable older adults. This call to care that brings you here is not a voice everyone hears. May we together be a beacon for those who look to us to find ways for them to be heard and abuse-free. Thank you for making this day possible. Blessings to all of you.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for those words. What a wonderful way to get us started. I'd also like to briefly acknowledge the other sponsors who make this event possible. Our gold sponsor, Wegmans, and our silver sponsors, At Home Independent Living, Bousquet Holstein, PLLC, Christopher Community Incorporated, Community Bank, Countryside Federal Credit Union, Fulton Savings Bank, Geddes Federal Savings and Loan Association, the Marone Law Firm, and Touching Hearts at Home. And just as a reminder, more information about all of our sponsors can be found on the Vera House website at our virtual resource table link on the conference registration page. The support of these sponsors not only funds this webinar series, but also extends beyond our conference to continue elder abuse education, prevention, and outreach work after this event. Just one final announcement before we begin today. Zoom webinar offers a chat and Q&A feature, which you'll all find at the bottom of your screen. At various points in today's session, our presenter is going to invite you to participate in some discussion, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to do so. You may also submit questions via the Q&A, and if time allows at the end of our session, our presenter will address those at that time. So without further ado, I would like to begin today's session exploring elder abuse issues. And it's my pleasure to introduce you all to our presenter today, Judge Janice Martin. Judge Martin is a faculty member of the National Judicial Institutes on Elder Abuse and Domestic Violence, and she trains national audiences of judges and other professionals on the issues of elder law, elder abuse, and domestic violence. And as a reminder, Judge Martin's full bio is available on our conference webpage. So with this, Judge Martin, I'll turn our session over to you to introduce yourself and get us started today.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. And Lauren, are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you perfectly.
All right, great. All right, so let's get started. I'm Judge Janice Martin. I'm delighted to be here with you. I am sorry I am not there in person, but delighted to be here with you on Zoom nonetheless. So why are we here? Why this topic? Very simply, because our older population is increasing and increasing at a relatively significant pace. All right. By the year 2030, 1 out of every 5 Americans will be a senior, and more individuals will be over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. Those are pretty startling statistics. We also know that senior life expectancy continues to increase. So as a result, you and your communities will see more and more older adults as victims, litigants, witnesses, and perpetrators. So you and your professions and your communities need to be prepared to handle the increased number of elder abuse cases headed your way. Unfortunately, I believe the pandemic has probably exacerbated the situation, with individuals being forced to quarantine in place, business closures, economic upheaval, which forced family members to move back in with relatives. School closures probably prompted grandparents to have to take on child caring roles. And certainly that has probably enhanced the potential and the propensity for abuse across all family members. What are our learning objectives today? Well, as a result of this session, we want you to be better able to identify how elder abuse may present in the cases before you. We want you to consider the pervasiveness of ageism and how ageist assumptions can have harmful effects on older litigants in court. We want you to be able to discuss what it means to create survivor-centered, informed decisions. Now, Lauren, I am not able to see the interpreter, so I don't know what I've done with my screen sharing, but if you can assist me with that, or else interpreters, if I am talking too fast, just send me a chat. All right. Now we're just going to get you to work right off the bat. We're going to have you participate in a poll. It's very simple. We want you to indicate the frequency with which you encounter elder abuse. Do you see it frequently, very frequently, once in a while, rarely, or almost never? Please vote. Lauren, are we getting some polling results in yet?
We are, so it's looking like we have quite a mix here. We have about, I would say, a slim majority saying about 39% saying that they see it once in a while. I know we still have a couple of votes coming in here, but it looks like once in a while is kind of in our lead. But in the interest of time, if you'd like, I can go ahead and end the poll and share the results with everyone. All right. So hopefully everybody, including you, Judge Martin, can see the results of
Okay,
our
so
poll.
we got some interesting results. We had 16% that said almost never, which is kind of surprising, but we had the majority that say once in a while, frequently. All right. Very interesting. We have found out statistically for every one elder abuse case that's reported, there are probably 26 that go unreported and undetected. So I'm wondering if those poll numbers kind of reinforce that concern. Interesting. So if you see elder abuse, for those of you who indicate you've seen it, even those who say they rarely see it, what are the most common forms of abuse that you see? Is it physical? Is it sexual? Is it financial? Is it emotional? Indicate in your chat box very briefly.
we're getting a lot of responses, Judge Martin. I would say the vast majority from most people is financial. That's definitely the most common response that we're getting. We're also getting
And
a lot
I should
of,
see some people responding in the chat box.
Yep, if you pull up your chat down at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see what everybody's chiming in with. So we're seeing a lot of financial, quite a few mentions of emotional as well. Some neglect as well, but I would definitely say financial is our most common response. And thank you all for chiming in here.
Lauren, are you getting any results as it relates to the chat box?
Yes, Judge Martin, can you hear me? Everyone, it appears we may be having a little technical difficulties on Judge Martin's end. I believe that her computer may be muted.
Primarily, I hear from trainings that I normally do that it is a lot of financial abuse. We see some physical, but there's also, and I want you to be aware of that, there are all sorts of other types of abuse that occurs: emotional, medical neglect, nutritional neglect, physical abuse, obviously. But there can be sexual abuse that we need to understand. Okay. And we're going to return in just a second to this issue. Okay, so if you see elder abuse, it can be a number of types of abuses. Okay, so next we're going to be looking at a video, and we're going to be looking at a video of Anne. Okay, and Anne is, let me tell you a little bit about Anne. Anne is this older woman who is happily living alone, enjoying her life, who's suddenly confronted with her grown son who decides he wants to move back in with her until he can get his life together. Okay. So he says he just wants to move back in until he can get on his feet. As you watch this video of Anne, I want you to listen to how the son behaved. How did he manage to control her? What control tactics did he use? And listen to how that made Anne feel. We'll talk about it on the other side, but listen to this video.
Goes to Chicago and New York. His overbearing manner, the women threw him out, his friends. So he came back here, had no job, no place to live, and I said to him, I've got that room. You can stay here for 2 to 2.5 years until you get a job and get your own place. In the meantime, he was taking over the control of my mind. It got to the point where I felt about 2 inches tall. Anything that I wanted to do, I had to ask permission with my own money. I'd see something in a catalog or in a newspaper and I'd say, is it okay if I order that? He was co-signer on my bank accounts. I had my check register was messed up. He got that. When the bills came in, we had a little container where we'd put the bills in, and at the beginning of each month, we'd take the bills out, he'd look at the bills, write the check and sign it, and then have me check it before I mailed it out. I wasn't even allowed to write a check. And I knew something was wrong, but a mother's a mother. You don't want to think that way. I was unaware that he was using one of my credit cards to buy tools. He would go over to the store, buy certain tools, use my credit card. 2-3 days later, he'd go back there with the tool. It doesn't work right. And instead of putting the amount back into my account, he demanded the cash, and I gave him the cash because he was on the account. But from the time he was a teenager, he was always there with his hand out. He's going to have this, that, and the other thing. So I thought, well, that's part of his personality.
Did Barry ever call you names?
No,
No.
he never used a bad name or a bad word to me. He never laid a hand on me. He was always there to help. But even taking care of this house, he took charge of it because he was planning to make it his own. He had underhandedly coerced me into signing into a reverse mortgage. I didn't understand it because the salesperson was talking to him, not to me. He also, the beginning of the year, just about 6 months before we kicked him out, had drawn up a petition. How he did it, I don't know. But he drew up a petition to have me declared incompetent and put into a home and forged my signature on it. The family said, well, he's there, he's taking care of Mom, we shouldn't bother her. Well, she calls us asking for help. I didn't feel I needed to get any help from the family, but call me once in a while. Let me know that you think about me. Well, it got to the point where he would monitor my calls, stand at the end of the one hall to make sure I didn't tell them anything, and he keeps saying, don't tell him anything, don't tell him anything. Well, it got to the point where they were afraid to say anything to me, to contact me at all. Until my blessed granddaughter talked him into coming. Let's see what's wrong with Grandma. I don't like the way things are going on. They all came together. He was there at the house, and he knew something was happening. He went in and called his daughter and son-in-law from Riverside, and they came down. And the family said, we don't like what you've been doing to Grandma or Mom. We'd like you to leave for 2 to 3 weeks till we get some stuff straightened out. So they were there. My oldest daughter came in from Phoenix and stayed with me almost a month to make sure that I was able to handle things alone. And it seemed as though all of a sudden, as soon as he was out of the house, a door opened up for me. I was no longer afraid to look around, to do things, to ask for help from people. 4 days after we kicked him out, my oldest daughter took me shopping and she reported back to the family. There's nothing wrong with Mom. She does comparative shopping. She knows how to use coupons. She knows how to handle money. She's back to where she was almost 6 years ago.
Judge Martin, before we move on, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So if you keep your computer volume just as it's set right now, you'll be able to hear me going forward, and I'll be able to let you know what's going on in the chat.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to have a brief discussion. So I'd like for those people whose last name starts between A and F to answer this first question in the chat. What type of abuse did she suffer? So if your last name starts between A and F, can you indicate in your chat what type of abuse did she suffer?
So a lot of people are chiming in with financial, emotional, someone added mental as well. A lot of emotional and financial is our #1 response.
Okay, so we got clearly financial, we got emotional, and we got what else?
A couple people mentioned mental, so I guess getting mental abuse.
Right.
Some people are talking about the tactics being used, like intimidation, or some psychological manipulation occurring.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so if your last name is G through L, tell me, how did he manage to control her? And as we're doing that, if your last name is M through R, think about that third question. But don't type it yet. So how did he manage to control her?
So a couple people are chiming in with isolation, keeping her away from other family members, using someone used the phrase mind control, so trying to kind of manipulate her reality. Someone mentioned gaslighting, exactly that. co-signing on her bank account, not allowing her to write checks.
This is a pretty advanced group. All right, so what else might be controlling her, M through R?
Someone mentioned the fear of losing him, so the fear of, I'm assuming, losing her relationship with her son.
The fear of losing her relationship with her son? Okay, that's interesting. Good. All right, anything else?
Feeling pressured to help him, feeling that she needed to help him as her child.
Okay.
Those are the two we got for that question.
You know, that's interesting. I would think also what else might be controlling her is the intimidation. His mind control of her, making her feel less capable, less confident, perhaps making her feel as though she's losing it, that she's less lucid than she really is. I think she probably also had a fear of being placed in a nursing home if the son tried to convince other individuals that she was incapable of caring for herself. So S through Z, how did this conduct make her feel? If your last name is S through Z, answer that for me.
Feeling helpless, isolated, scared, helpless and small, made her feel less capable, feel like less of a person, or fear that other people might view her as a fragile elder, feeling incompetent, feeling helpless.
You guys are great. You did an excellent job. Essentially, he made her feel what? 2 inches tall. He made her feel diminished, afraid. And then she said, I felt as though the door opened when he left. All right. And she also felt abandoned by other family members. You captured the first one extremely well. What type of abuse did she suffer? Clearly financial and emotional, because he took control of her assets, her checkbook. He wrote all of her checks. She even had to ask permission to spend her own money. He tricked her into that reverse mortgage. And then I really was outraged by the credit card scam, where he would buy things, return items, and instead of crediting her account, he took the cash. And then the emotional control of her mind was really insidious. So all of these things he did. How many of you think this is pretty unusual situation, or do you think this is pretty common that something like this could happen? Respond in your chat very briefly. Prevalent, rare, do you see this often, or is this unusual?
Pretty much everybody, Judge Martin, is saying common, that it is, they either see it a lot or that it probably happens a lot.
Very good. Very good. All right, so let's talk a little bit about elder abuse. I think we all have a pretty good handle on it, but it could be the physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect of any older adult. Who are the victims? Who are the perpetrators? When we talk about victims, obviously they're an older adult who experiences this abuse. But we find out disproportionately those who are affected are those who are isolated. And when I say isolated, I'm not necessarily talking about the fact that they live out on a farm or in a small community. They could live anywhere, even in a very urban setting, but they are detached from social connections, from their friends, from their church family, from their social group. Maybe it's because of their health issues. They're no longer able to ambulate or be mobile or get out. Clearly during COVID, they were locked down. And they may have declining health issues, which are interfering with their ability to interact with others. Maybe Parkinson's has affected their speech. Maybe early onset dementia or Alzheimer's is interfering with their social skills. Disproportionately, they live in poverty. They are disproportionately women, although we clearly know men can also be abused. The perpetrators, unfortunately, are usually family members or caregivers or those with whom the victim has an expectation of trust, which is probably why elder abuse is so vastly underreported, because it's really difficult for these individuals to report that this person with whom they have a lot of love and affinity and affection for has betrayed this trust and is now abusing them. They're humiliated, they're embarrassed, they're hurt that a loved one or someone with whom they had trust would do this to them. Okay? How are older people harmed? Well, you have all sorts of ways they can be harmed, but you could have accidents where slip and falls, unsteady gait, individuals that are ambulating and have an accident. You have well-intended caregivers, obviously, but you have well-intended caregivers that are maybe not as trained as they need to be. And those accidents can occur from transferring from bed to wheelchair, wheelchair to toilet, all of those things. You also have well-intended caregivers that make really egregious errors. I've encountered individuals who have dealt with individuals who wander because of their early onset dementia, and their response is to inappropriately tether someone and restrain them, which causes injury. Or they fail to understand that their mental or their physical decline with Parkinson's is causing them difficulty with swallowing, and there's a choking hazard. So, all of these things can cause harm to elders, in addition to just physical, sexual, emotional type of abuse. Okay? Why does elder abuse occur? Well, we have that pure, unadulterated greed. You remember with the Anne scenario, she said he always had his hand out. That was part of his personality. Okay. There are individuals who have a desire for material goods, money, and the assets of the older individual. And they will do anything they can to get a hold of it. What I really find interesting is a lot of times you have children and relatives that say, well, I was going to get it anyway when they died. I was going to inherit it, but it doesn't work that way. You don't get to take the property of the older individual prior to, right, the probate of the will and the actual bequest of the property being known. Then then we have that dynamic of power and control, right? Same thing we see in traditional domestic violence cases, that controlling, domineering personality that has to control everything, be in charge. Then we also have the deterioration model of aging, which is really, really very interesting. The introductory comments talking about looking at older adults through the lens of dignity and well-being, that these individuals are still full of promise, still learning, still growing, and that you shouldn't look at them as just a throwaway segment of society that's about ready to die, which I find very, very disturbing. A really good example of this is mandatory retirement age, where there's really no correlation between that rule and the ability of the person forced to retire. There are a lot of individuals who might be in their 70s who still have skill and experience and expertise, but yet they're told you have to go away now because you've met this mandatory retirement age. And a lot of times we are throwing away a wealth of knowledge and experience that is greatly needed in the legal profession in the judiciary, and elsewhere because of mandatory retirement age. Okay. So let's talk about age. We are, after all, talking about elder abuse, right? And age is a component of that. It's interesting. How many of you are reticent to share your age? As we get older, we get a lot of jokes and gag gifts. People tease you about getting old. I know right before I started my training this afternoon, my husband, who can be funny at times, I asked him, I go, honey, how do I look? Is this outfit okay? And his response was, oh, yeah, dear, you look fine. You look hot. You look hot in an AARP kind of way. That joke, I'll take it as a compliment, but it probably really wasn't. I look hot in an AARP kind of way. All right. So if you are not reticent to talk about it and you don't have a problem, tell me how old you are and give me one word that describes that age. So if you're 27, you might feel tired and worn out. You might be 63 and feel great. You might be 70 and feeling experienced. You might be 40 and feeling, vibrant. In your chat, just briefly state your age in one word to describe it.
Judge Martin, we're getting a lot of great responses to this. We had somebody say they're 73, proud to share their age. We have a 62-year-old who is feeling fly and ageless. We have 35 and tired, 60 alive and well, 54 and tired, 34 and exhausted, because a lot of us are feeling tired, 70s and energetic, 54 and content, 62 and youthful, 58 and proud, 28 and motivated. We're getting a big variety of ages and a big variety of emotional states as well.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I like this exercise because it always tells me how delusional my audience is. No, I'm joking, but it's good to hear the variety of responses. And that's true of age. It's nothing but a number. We can all feel differently. I can run into a lot of younger individuals who are absolutely exhausted, overwhelmed, fatigued, achy, tired, just because of dealing with all sorts of things that they have to deal with. Okay. So here's the next question. What age do you consider elderly or old? And I will tell you a funny story. There's a video that I wish I had time to share with you about younger individuals who all state they're in their 20s, that they think 50 is old. And then we expose them to individuals who are in their 70s who can do yoga and Tai Chi and dance movements that these 20-year-olds cannot replicate. And it's really mind-boggling to see their response. And then we asked them after the exercise, so what do you consider old now? And then they're all flabbergasted and they respond, oh, I don't know. So what age do you consider old?
So we're getting a big range of ages, and hopefully I am keeping up. I think that the youngest age that came in here was 60, and the oldest was 100 in terms of the range of what age is considered old. A couple people have pointed out that it can be affected by how programs define age. So one person commented that being 55 in the program that they work for puts you in the category of an elder or someone who's older. But a lot of people are commenting that it depends on the person, and it's more about mindset and the individual person's functionality and the way that they're feeling more so than the number.
You guys are a fabulous group. That is absolutely correct, that people age at different levels. And yes, it depends on their health and what's going on with them, and a lot of factors. Okay, so let's look at synonyms for aging. I love this. Look at some of these synonyms. So we have senile, We have decrepit, we have infirm, we have senescent, we have geriatric, feeble-minded, gaga, gnarled, ancient. So when you look at some of these terms, none of them are positive attributes. None of them are flattering. So how would you like to be referred to as a senile, infirm, ancient, senescent, gnarled social worker? Or a feeble-minded, ripe, uh, decrepit attorney? So none of these synonyms for aging are very positive, which is what is very interesting about ageism and this discussion. We have this deterioration model of aging that I briefly talked about, that talks about aging as being a diminishment of individuals, a decline. We have to be careful about how we interact with older adults when we encounter them. Are we patronizing? Do we talk down to them? I have a funny story with my dad when I took him to the doctor and he was 92. And the nurse literally, without any indication that he had a competency issue or incapacity issue, start talking to him as though he was having all sorts of cognitive problems. She basically said, and she started talking to him like in a baby voice. Mr. Martin, what is your name? Very good. How old are you? Very good. Where do you live? Very good. What month is it? Very good. And my dad, being the person that he was at 90, responded to her, Nurse, what is your name? Very good. What is your age? Very good. And then he asked her a list of questions and clapped and mimicked her interaction with him. And he goes, well, now that you've answered those questions, perhaps you're competent enough to take my blood pressure and take me back to the professional who can really ascertain my underlying health issues, because clearly you cannot. All right, so that was a little harsh on my dad's part, but I'm sharing with you that this response to society, that we diminish older people simply by looking at them and concluding that they have some capacity issues, is very disturbing. We also have the COVID-19 example. Do you recall that initially when the COVID pandemic struck and it hit nursing homes primarily in the state of Washington, and initially before we knew better about the disease, we thought that it only struck older individuals. There were elected officials who were candid about saying, well, it's only affecting older people. We need to open up our society. And I'm willing as an older person to sacrifice my generation so that my children and grandchildren can live in a booming economy. It was very, very disturbing to hear someone say, let's just let all the old people die. Let's just disregard what is happening because it's only affecting them. And so we shouldn't shut down our economy or shut down businesses. Okay. All right. So, what are some of the assumptions out there about older adults? Not necessarily what you believe to be true, but what are some of the assumptions that are out there that you hear in the media, that you hear in the news, that you hear from neighbors, friends, family members? Just what are some of the assumptions people have? And I'll throw one out there, that they're in bad health, that they're frail. What else could there be? What else is out there? Use your chat function to share that with me.
That they're unable to take care of themselves, that they make bad decisions, that they're forgetful, not able to use technology, shouldn't be living alone, that all older adults have dementia or are cognitively impaired in some way, that many are hard of hearing, that they shouldn't be driving anymore. just generally the assumption that there's reduced capacity on all levels and in all areas of functioning.
Oh, I love it. You guys covered a lot. They're frail, they have poor health, they're forgetful, they're confused, they're weak, they're poor historians, they have poor vision, they have poor hearing, they have mobility issues. I love the bad drivers. What about they're cantankerous, they're stubborn, they're stingy. Technology challenge, yes, they're sedentary. All of these generalizations. Okay, so what are the unintended side effects that result from people believing these assumptions?
One person commented that it can result in older adults being marginalized in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Another person commented being dismissed as irrelevant. We're getting lots of chats now. People might get taken advantage of as a result of these assumptions or be more isolated. In general, our community is not valuing our older adults, taking away their independence.
Taking away their independence because we make this assumption that these people are incapable, and we make generalizations about older adults that are inaccurate. That is exactly the problem with these assumptions. Okay, so we're going to look at a case, and I apologize that I'll move through this quickly because we need to keep time factor in mind. Okay, so you're presiding. Let's just pretend you're a judge, okay? That you're presiding over a protective order case. The petitioner seeks a permanent civil protection order, including a provision to have the respondent removed from the home. Petitioner and respondent have been married for 66 years. They live in a home they purchased 40 years ago, and they're retired high school teachers. So even if you're not an attorney or a judge, you're going to be making a decision on this case. And as a social worker or professional or a police officer, you can make this decision, okay? So the other facts that you need to be aware of: petitioner reported being terrified of the respondent, thinks respondent is lethally dangerous. Petitioner received medical attention for a bite mark in the torso, alleges respondent caused the injury. Petitioner alleges that respondent will not allow petitioner to utilize the telephone or talk to friends. And respondent states that petitioner dispenses respondent's drugs incorrectly and late. Both parties drink alcohol. Neither party has a criminal record or mental health issues. Respondent is physically disabled, has diabetes, and uses a wheelchair. Several weeks ago, petitioner suffered a major head injury. Petitioner was hit in the head by a telephone and a pipe by respondent. Police arrived at the scene and took petitioner to the hospital, but did not arrest respondent. Respondent stated, "I have no remorse. Don't care if petitioner lives or dies." Petitioner seeks a permanent civil protection order, including a provision to have respondent removed from the home.
And
Okay.
Judge Martin, if I could just jump in real quick, and is this where we have our images coming up in a minute?
No,
Oh,
not
I
yet.
apologize.
That's okay. So what are the assumptions? What kind of assumptions can you make about this case? Very briefly. And there is one other thing that I forgot to tell you on the facts, and I apologize. Petitioner appeared pro se, speaks limited English, and was not given an interpreter. Judge questions the vacate order, stating, "Where will respondent go if ordered to vacate?" So that's the last twist I forgot to tell you about. Okay, so what are the assumptions we have? Briefly, and we've got to do this quickly, what assumptions can you make from that fact scenario?
Somebody commented that this might be a long-term abusive situation.
Uh-huh.
Someone else commented that this might be in a location where there's no mandatory arrest policies or
Okay.
laws.
Okay.
Someone is asking, couldn't the petitioner move away from the respondent as the respondent is in a wheelchair? People are commenting it's hard, sometimes it's hard to make assumptions. There's lots of complicated facets to this case.
Okay. Obviously, I'd make an assumption there's a communication problem, an interpreter was needed. I would say that there's an assumption that there probably needs to be an advocate. An advocate is needed in this case. An assumption regarding serious injury because hospitalization, that this is a high lethality risk case, that there's a volatile relationship, that this is a long history of DV. Those are some of the assumptions I would make. What is difficult about this case? I would say language barrier, number one. I would also say the length of the relationship with finances being commingled. Okay. Anything else?
A lot of people did point out the language barrier. One participant pointed out that we need to consider the care of both parties and the needs of both parties in the situation.
Okay. I would say the incompetence of the judge, who obviously has no DV training, who asked that inappropriate question. First of all, didn't appoint an interpreter, didn't appoint an advocate. Let's assume maybe didn't have the ability to appoint an advocate. But if someone has a language problem or barrier, it's a due process issue, access. They have to have an interpreter. So for me, the difficulty about this case is we have a ill-informed, uninformed, bad judge. Okay. All right. What decision would you make? Would you enter the protection order and the order to vacate? Yes or no? With what you know.
Got one no right now.
Okay.
We have a yes, we have an unable to determine, getting a mix of yes and no's.
Okay.
And
All
need
right.
more information.
Need more information. Okay. All right. Okay. The other difficulties that I see in this case is it's a pro se litigant. There's no attorney, there's no advocate, there's probably no safety plan or link to resources. There's obviously the language barrier, the communication issue. I would say the financial situation during the separation, if there is one, because this is a marriage of long-term duration, funds are commingled. They're probably on a fixed income. Of course, that's an assumption, but these are all things that we need to make. If you entered the order to vacate and entered a protection order, what would the provisions include? Would they include no contact? Would it include no damage? A restriction of feet away from petitioner? Would it include restitution for payment of medical bills? Would it include a referral for DVO offender treatment or anything along those lines? These are all things you need to think about. All right, so we're going to look at a couple of slides, and I want to warn you in advance that the slides that you're going to see next are a little graphic, and you may find them disturbing. So please take whatever care you need to take to view these, or if necessary, turn away. But I do want to make that warning. Okay, so let's look at what really happened here. Let's look at the parties. Who do you think this is? And when I see this, I clearly think this has to be the victim, because I'm looking at the injuries to the head and the blood. And I'm thinking this is a temporary wheelchair used by emergency medical services to place the victim in so they can take their blood pressure, check their pulse, and check on them. Who do you think this is? In your chat? We all concur this is probably the victim?
We have a couple people saying they think it's the respondent at first look. So
Mhm.
actually the majority are saying respondent. One person said they believe it to be the victim or the petitioner.
Okay, I'm surprised so many people thought it was the respondent because of the injuries. Okay, well, who is this person? Obviously the victim. And we can see the massive and incredible injuries to the petitioner. Head injuries, blood, neck, nose, face, all of the above. This is the weapon that was utilized. The steel pipe that respondent kept under the bed. Someone indicated, why couldn't they get away because the respondent was in a wheelchair? One of the most egregious domestic violence cases I ever had was a victim in a wheelchair who cornered the victim um, and put the wheelchair in lock and pistol whipped the victim beyond recognition. This person clearly wasn't able to get away because of the weight of the wheelchair, the weight of the person, and the fact that they were cornered. So don't think just because someone is in a wheelchair that they're incapable of inflicting harm or being dangerous. The point that I was trying to raise by this exercise is that don't assume because of someone's age that they are frail or harmless and not incapable or not capable of inflicting harm. Don't assume because someone is on a walker or in a wheelchair or has a disability that they're not capable of being dangerous. Regardless of age, you have to assess dangerousness, including the history of violence. And in this case, there was a history. The previous bite mark, the fact that she had been to the hospital before, the fact that she said that she feared for her safety, that she felt this individual was lethally dangerous, which raises the importance of listening to victims. They live with a person 24/7. They know more than anyone else the dangerous tendencies of an individual. And when someone indicates to me that they believe their significant other or partner is dangerous, it's important for me to listen and evaluate that statement. Okay? All individuals that appear frail or harmless simply are not. So don't fall into that trap. We have the Jackie Campbell study that talks about leading risk factors for intimate partner homicide. And she talks about a number of factors, but what I'd want you to zoom in on in this case was the previous conduct of the respondent. He didn't have a firearm, but he had a weapon that was always ready. He used the steel pipe and he used a phone to batter the victim. He had made threats to her before, and there had been prior assaults. Okay. There were allegations of substance abuse, drinking. And he had this controlling, domineering personality where he wouldn't let her use the phone. He didn't want her talking to friends. He was obsessive. And then he made these allegations that she was messing with his medication. So there's paranoia in his personality. Okay. Don't fall into the trap that at age 60 or 65, violence disappears. Okay. Not all gray haired, jolly, bearded, white haired men are jolly St. Nick's. Not all 75-year-old grandmas are loving and cookie baking or nurturing. Some of them are evil as hell, and they really can't even bake cookies. So don't fall into that trap. Okay. There are a few studies on homicide, suicide with older adults, but what we have found is that contrary to popular notions, homicide, suicide was not the result of individuals deciding they would ride off into the sunset together. Usually it was one of the individuals being a perpetrator, typically a male, who shot the older individual in the back of the head while asleep. So again, this domestic violence component, not this, we're aging, we're getting older, because our health is failing, let's die together. No, clearly just the opposite in a lot of cases. Okay, so let's return back to that Anne fact scenario. You remember Anne with the video with the son who decides he's going to move back in with her until he gets his life together. Let's assume that early on, after Anne's son moved back in with her, he filed a petition for guardianship, asking for full guardianship. In your chat function, tell me what type of information do you need? So we're going to be talking about guardianship for a second here.
Someone brings up that they would need a doctor's testimony regarding mental competency, other comments, a medical diagnosis, the son's credit history, a mental or cognitive assessment, a mental health evaluation, lots of mental assessments or cognitive assessments, documentation from a doctor regarding competency, a medical eval, perhaps a home visit to see living conditions. And we also have a comment to receive the answer to the question, why does the son want guardianship?
Very good. Very extensive list of things that you need. And one of the first things that you need to zoom in on is, what allegation is there of incapacity? What is the evidence? What catastrophic intervening event has occurred that would require there to be a guardianship initiated? Okay. Was there a stroke? Was there a traumatic head injury? Was there a car accident? Has there been some type of intervening event? Okay. Then we move on to, is there evidence of incapacity? Do we have a medical assessment or diagnosis? And then when we look at whether or not there's a medical evaluation diagnosis, we need to do our due diligence to ascertain the adequacy of that diagnosis. Is it sufficient? Well, what type of expert provided it? Now, there are some jurisdictions that say a doctor's report. Well, is it a dermatologist or a podiatrist? Or is it a neuropsychologist or psychiatrist? Is it a neurologist? Is it someone who's qualified to actually provide this report? Assuming that person is qualified, what is the quality of the report? All right. Did they examine this person merely for this guardianship proceeding, or if they had a long-term relationship with this individual? Did they review the person's prior medical history and information? Did they talk to their family physician or internist? How long was the evaluation? What time of day was the evaluation? What particular tests were submitted to this individual? All of these things deal with the sufficiency of the information. Now, in this case, did we have any indication that there was a problem? No. Other than the fact that Anne's son was greedy. And once he was removed, Anne was absolutely fine. She said, like, the door opened for her. Her granddaughter and her children and her relatives all said she was fine. They took her to the grocery store. She was able to handle her math, get her change, make purchases, evaluate prices. She was absolutely fine. Okay. All right. So, what you need to take in terms of steps is evidence of impairment. You must have evidence of incapacity. Okay. And you guys answered that very well. The other thing you need to do is think about what is bringing this case to court now. Well, clearly the greed of the son, ideally. But in another type of case, you need to look at, has there been some disabling event which indicates that this person is no longer able to handle their personal or financial affairs? Okay. Have all the procedural requirements been met? Do we have sufficient evidence? Do we have an assessment? Do we have a diagnosis from a qualified expert who has prepared a sufficient report indicating the length and quality of the examination and the test administered? Is guardianship necessary and helpful? Well, you can always find that a guardianship may be helpful, but is it necessary? And that's the key, because we do not want to unduly restrict someone's liberty or independence. Okay? Consider whether this is a temporary or emergency guardianship that just could handle the situation as the person recovers from an automobile accident, or temporary situation like a urinary tract infection or uncontrolled diabetes that will subside or improve after medication or antibiotic. Okay. Then you have to look at, what do the reports suggest? All right. You have to evaluate that report in terms of quality. And then where else could you obtain information? In this case, where else could you obtain information? Assuming there was some diagnosis that there was a problem with Anne, where else could you obtain information? Did you indicate that in your chat?
People are saying asking other family members, the primary care or family doctor.
Absolutely.
Mentioning family.
Yeah, you could certainly ask the family in this situation, and they probably had lots of information. And we actually had the relative that moved in with her when they kicked the son out, took her shopping, evaluated her day-to-day activities, her abilities, ascertained whether there were any deficits, concluded that she was absolutely fine, and reported back to the rest of the family members. Then, what are your observations as a professional? If you're a social worker and you're doing a home visit, what are your observations? If you're a police officer and you're making an investigation, if you're an attorney or a guardian ad litem, what are your observations of the subject when you encounter them? And I caution you about that because I have seen perpetrators sabotage the victim prior to the visit of an APS worker or an investigator, or prior to taking them to court. They will remove their hearing aid, remove their glasses, over medicate them, under medicate them, all right, to make them appear to be more confused and less lucid than they really are. So when I observe an individual in court, I always question whether or not they wear glasses. Do they have their hearing aid? Do they need a hearing amplification device? If they've eaten, All of these things come into play. When did you observe them? Because sundowning can be in play. Was it early morning? Was it late afternoon when they're fatigued and tired? Was it a situation where they just took medication that may make them drowsy? All of these things. Okay. Make sure that you realize that there are individuals who will certainly set up an individual to appear to be more diminished than they really are. Then you need to look at what areas are the individual's decision-making impaired. Okay, perhaps they can handle activities of daily living. They can do their shopping, they can feed and clothe themselves, handle housekeeping, do everything around the house, even handle banking. But they're clearly unable to handle complex business transactions. They aren't able to handle a solar generated lease option for the family farm and read a 82-page contract dealing with technical terms. Okay. Look at what they can do in terms of their daily activities and always zoom in and look at it from the view of what is this person's retained ability? What are they still able to do? So that if you are forced to entertain a guardianship petition and there's sufficient evidence that there may be an issue, you still want to provide an order that recognizes the person's retained abilities. You also want to consider what are the person's wishes? Do they want a guardian? And in this case, Anne clearly would not want her son to be her guardian if there was a guardianship proceeding. He would be the last choice. Okay. Are the subject's choices consistent with long held patterns? Well, oftentimes you will find a petitioner coming into court who hasn't interacted with that particular relative in 15 years, and they're the one who wants to be appointed guardian. It's clear to you that that would certainly not be the subject's choice, that they are clearly closer to that special niece or nephew or grandson or daughter than this individual who hasn't seen them in 15 years. Okay. Then you have to examine what level of supervision is needed. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So just because there's a petition for guardianship, there doesn't necessarily have to be a full guardianship. It could be a partial guardianship. It could be a situation where they only need assistance with finances. So you could have a conservatorship or just someone to assist them with financial affairs. And then what is expected of this guardian? And this is where attorneys, judges, social workers, all of you need to be very aware. As a judge who has handled guardianship proceedings for a long, long time, I made it abundantly clear that I expected a lot out of a guardian. I wanted them to understand that they owed fidelity and loyalty to the incapacitated person, and that they were accountable to the court, and that they had to act solely in the best interest of that incapacitated person. I wanted them to understand that every step they took, I would be watching them, just like that Sting song. I made it abundantly clear that I expected them to act accordingly with their oath. And what I did was I provided instructions to the guardian up front. I explained to them that they would be accountable to the court, that any questions that I had about expenditures would result in them being called back into court to explain the situation. Before I appointed them, I gave them oral instructions, written instructions. They had to sign a guardianship contract. And at one time, I used to have them view a guardianship video about their responsibilities. All right. Then I explained to them very thoroughly their responsibility to set up a guardianship account with the bank, that no funds should be commingled, only the assets of the ward belong in that account, that there could be no cash transactions. Everything needed to be documented by a paper trail, whether it was credit card or check, so that I could clearly understand the nature of the disbursements. All right. I had many guardians, not an inordinate amount, but I had, and I shouldn't say many, I had several guardians after their initial encounter with the court's instructions declined to be guardians. And that was fine with me, because I wanted to know at the front end if they were not up to being careful about or serious about their fiduciary duties. I did not want them to serve in that capacity. Okay. It wasn't as though I was trying to run guardians off. I just wanted to stress the importance and the serious nature of the responsibility. We also did background checks, criminal record checks. Certainly, I didn't want someone to be a guardian who had difficulty handling their own financial affairs or balancing their own checkbook. Okay. So, how often would the capacity be reviewed? Annually. In Anne's case, if it was a situation like this, and let's assume there was some finding or diagnosis of disability, because this would be one of those cases that would be marginal, I'd want to review that probably pretty soon. How often should the guardian's actions be reviewed? Every time they filed a report, clearly annually. But before that first year was up, when they filed the inventory, the first financial report that was required, I would be reviewing the guardian's actions. Okay. Let's look at capacity concepts very briefly when you're looking at guardianship. Remember, capacity is situational. Depends upon the time of day. Depends upon the degree or complexity of the situation. Depends upon the medication or the health of the individual. It can fluctuate. It could clearly fluctuate if there's uncontrolled diabetes or oxygen deprivation or Parkinson's affecting speech, which makes you think that someone is less capable or has capacity issues. Capacity is contextual. Depends upon the task. Are they preparing lunch, or are they dealing with a complex tax return? Or they're handling their activities of daily living? Or are you asking them to deal with a multi-million investment portfolio? Okay. So all of these things deal with capacity. The more significant the decision and the consequences, the higher the level of capacity required in a situation. Okay. We have to make sure that when we are making guardianship determinations, we determine guardianship in a manner that balances the well-being with the rights of the individual. We certainly don't want to unduly infringe or abridge an individual's right to make their own decisions and self-determinations. And here's what I typically get. I'll get someone who files a petition because an 82-year-old man is gambling and at Churchill Downs all the time, spending his money. And his children are worried that he's being foolish and there's some issue of incapacity. Or this 82-year-old man is flying off to Las Vegas with 4 or 5 women he just met at Churchill Downs. or at a bar, and he's indulging them with diamonds and gifts. Essentially, the children are worried that dad is spending their inheritance. Well, obviously, unless there is some indication that there is some cognitive impairment, that is not a case ripe for guardianship. And here's the $1,000,000 question I always ask people. Would you be filing this petition if this individual were 35 years old? If this 35-year-old was flying off to Las Vegas every other weekend with 4 or 5 different women and buying them diamonds and jewelry, and he had plenty of money and it wasn't interfering with his ability to provide the necessities of his life, would you even consider filing a petition? No, probably not. So I know that there is this overwhelming desire to protect older individuals. We always want to protect them. But in doing so, we cannot trample upon their rights and their freedom to make their own decisions. You always need to identify the less restrictive alternative. And as I indicated to you earlier, as a judge, I probably went overboard with providing guidance to guardians because I really wanted people to understand the serious nature of that undertaking. And I certainly didn't want to put a fox in charge of the hen house and appoint someone who would clearly exploit or take advantage of someone's cognitive impairment or disability. So when I would see reports that there were 4 or 5 trips to Disneyland or to Aruba or to Jamaica, and this individual was a quadriplegic, had had cerebral palsy all their life, was immobile, bedridden, that certainly would raise eyebrows for me because clearly the guardian was taking family vacations with their children and grandchildren with awards money. And certainly that would raise all sorts of red flags for me. Okay. So those are the type of things that you need to be aware of. All right. Any questions or concerns that any of you might have? You guys have been a very advanced audience. You have raised all sorts of interesting, you've answered all of my inquiries extremely thoroughly. And I appreciated your insight and thought process. Any questions?
We did, and I'm sure we'll get some more as we go, but we did have a couple of questions come in during the conversation that I reserved. One question was in the case study that we visited first with, I believe it was the respondent and the perpetrator that both had some different health concerns. The question was, why was the perpetrator in that case, the individual that was in the wheelchair, why were they not arrested?
Interesting. And I'm not necessarily sure of that particular fact scenario, if it was poorly trained police, or if, and this is what we encounter a lot of times, when individuals have all sorts of health problems, they're in wheelchairs and they're arrested, or say I incarcerate them in court and send them to jail. As soon as I get off the bench, I'll get a call from the jail saying, Judge Martin, we can't handle this person in jail because they have all sorts of health problems. And I'm very candid with them about, I'm sorry, that is really not my problem. And I don't mean to sound flippant, but you need to figure it out. I am not going to release this person from jail or confinement because you find it difficult. You work it out. That is your responsibility to provide confinement for them. Surely, within your resources, you're able to make accommodations for this individual. I know that it may be inconvenient and stressful, but work it out. So I'm not really sure in the situation why they weren't arrested. But in small jurisdictions, you would be surprised at the number of times sheriffs balk, police balk about taking an older, medically compromised individual to jail. Now, if they were 20 years old, wouldn't have a problem at all, probably. But in response to that question, I'm not sure why they were not arrested. And I didn't delve into it much because, as you recall, this was a protective order proceeding, a civil case as opposed to a criminal. If it were a criminal case, I probably would have, found out exactly why, but that's a very good question. Any other questions?
Thank you. We have another one from earlier and then a couple that just came in. I'm not sure. I apologize in advance if we can't get to them all. The second question that came in was regarding power of attorney. And this might not be something we have a ton of time to get into, but the individual is asking what power someone with a power of attorney has. For example, if we see that there's a person who needs a higher level of care, can the person, I'm assuming the person with power of attorney, make that decision without the individual in need of care agreeing to it?
Okay, so ask that question again for me. Can the person with a power of attorney file a guardianship proceeding?
They didn't specify whether it was specifically a guardianship proceeding. It sounds like just in general, someone with power of attorney, would they be able to make a decision to put, they said, a higher level of care into place for that individual without that individual agreeing to receiving the higher level of care?
Interesting. Well, here's what will happen. Once a guardianship determination is made, is that negates that power of attorney and the guardianship is controlling. Okay. So if that individual is trying to pursue this on behalf of that individual, there are checks and balances in place, because assuming that person with a power of attorney tries to pursue a guardianship proceeding, there still has to be that underlying diagnosis which protects that victim or protects that incapacitated or alleged incapacitated individual, because a doctor, physician, an expert is going to have to conclude, one, there is incapacity, and there is some indicia that this person is incapable of caring for themselves. So if you're worried about a power of attorney acting inappropriately and running off, filing a guardianship, that person's going to be protected by the actual proceeding itself. Okay. And once that proceeding is in place and a guardianship is appointed, that would negate that power of attorney in my jurisdiction. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. We do have a couple more, and I've private messaged some people regarding their questions. We did have a question about when to call adult protective, but I would actually recommend we have a session tomorrow, actually all about that. It's at noon tomorrow. Our session will be covering adult protective and how that works.
And I'd be interested to know if you're a mandatory reporting state. I'm a mandatory reporting state. So I always encourage people that, when in doubt, call. But
right. We actually are not in New York. We are the only state that is not.
Interesting.
So I'm not sure if that person is from New York, but just one more legal question we got, and I think we have just a second to answer it. What can we ask estate attorneys to do to protect elder clients from fraud?
Oh, from fraud. What can you ask the state attorneys to do? Oh, well, for instance, in a lot of jurisdictions I work with, the state attorneys and the attorney general's office have done a lot of extensive training with banking institutions and investment institutions to give them tips on potential actions that raise red flags. And I think as a result of the banking institutions and tellers being more informed about elder abuse, when red flags appear, they're more apt to report it to the police. And we have a dedicated elder abuse exploitation unit in our police department. So I would encourage AGs to do training with banking, financial institutions. Make sure we have a dedicated division of your respective police departments so that they can respond. I would say coordinated community trainings between APS, the police, the banking institutions, to all be more on the lookout as it relates to fraud. And fraud is probably more egregious now because of internet scams. Okay. And then the final thing that I wanted to share with everyone before we leave, I failed to talk about this point in terms of marginalization of older adults. I hope that during COVID, a lot of you made provisions for ensuring that older adults had access to services. I know across the nation, people had to sign up in a lot of jurisdictions for their COVID shots only by internet only. So if you didn't have a smartphone and you couldn't access the internet, you couldn't schedule an appointment. I know a lot of our court systems have closed down, and unless you had internet access or you could have Zoom proceedings, you had no availability to court procedures. Now, I am not suggesting that all older individuals are technologically challenged, but I do know that, for instance, in my jurisdiction, it was appalling to me that the health department, that the court system, that other entities didn't make provision to accommodate individuals who are not connected to their smartphones 24/7. We had an instance where we had high school students who donated, two young ladies who donated 2 hours every afternoon, 7 hours on Saturday and Sunday to help older people who did not have smartphones sign up to get their COVID appointment shots. That is very disturbing. I know a lot of you relegated your court systems to online platforms. Well, there are some people, because of financial situations, they're impoverished, they're housing challenged, they don't have a home or stable address, or they just are not technologically connected, who were cut out. So please, as you look forward, think about older adults and don't marginalize them with this theory that, hey, everybody has a smartphone, everybody can connect. No, that is not true. And it's not just older adults, it's everyone. So I worried about that segment of society that was disenfranchised. Okay. Any other questions?
I think that's actually all that we have time for today.
You
But I
guys
really
were
appreciate it.
a great audience. I will share with you that if you have any questions, you can contact any of these three individuals, including me, to follow up. You were a wonderful audience. I thank you for the time and attention you have given me, and I thank all of you for your tireless work in the field of older adults. I would remind all of you about what our speaker said earlier. Older adults are still growing, they're still learning, they're still full of promise, and view them through the lens of dignity and well-being. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Judge Martin. I just want you to know you're getting a lot of thanks and appreciation in the chat. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care, everyone.